Quiet cafe in town where Anna and I used to have date nights when Fib was little. Phoebe looked terrible. The bruises on her face had faded, but she seemed hollow like a shell of her former self. She broke down almost immediately, apologizing profusely for her behavior and the things she'd said. It reminded me of when she was little and would come to me crying after a nightmare. I had to resist the urge to comfort her like I used to. She explained that her affair with Mark had been brief, just a few weeks when Jake was working particularly long hours. She'd ended it herself, consumed by guilt. But Mark had become obsessed, constantly texting her and showing up at her work. When she threatened to tell his wife, he said he'd tell Jake everything. For almost 2 years, Phoebe lived in fear of Mark threats. She was too ashamed to tell me or Jake, thinking she deserved the stress as punishment for her mistake. But last month, Mark followed through. He sent Jake a series of explicit messages detailing the affair. Jake confronted Phoebe, and in his anger, he hit her. It was the first time he'd ever been violent. Phoebe was shocked and scared, which is why she came to me. She admitted that her rage at me was misplaced. She was really angry at herself for the whole situation. As she talked, I couldn't help but think about Anna. How would she have handled this situation? Anna always had a way of balancing compassion with tough love. I tried to channel that energy as I listened to Phoebe. I told Phoebe about local domestic violence resources and offered to pay for therapy, but I stood firm that she couldn't stay with me. The trust between us was too broken, and I didn't want to risk putting myself in the middle of her volatile situation with Jake and Mark. It wasn't an easy decision, but I felt it was the right one. Phoebe understood, which surprised me. She's currently staying with a friend and attending therapy. We're taking baby steps to rebuild our relationship, starting with weekly phone calls. It's awkward and sometimes painful, but it's a start. As for Mark, I reported his behavior to the police. They're investigating him for stalking and blackmail. His wife left him when she found out about the affair and his subsequent behavior. I can't help but feel partially responsible. If I hadn't distanced myself from Mark years ago, could I have seen this coming? Could I have prevented it? Somehow Jake's family reached out to apologize for his actions. They assured me he's never been violent before and is also in therapy now. Phoebe and Jake are separated and considering divorce. It's strange to think that the young couple I watched fall in love in high school might soon be over. It's been a difficult month, but I feel like we're all on a path to healing. Now I'm cautiously optimistic about rebuilding my relationship with Phoebe, but I know it will take time and effort from both of us. I've been spending a lot of time in my workshop working on a new project. A hope chest for Phoebe. It's made from the same wood as the shelf I built for her nursery all those years ago. I'm not sure when or if I'll give it to her, but working on it helps me process everything that's happened in quiet moments. I find myself talking to Anna, asking for guidance. I know she's not really here, but imagining what she would say helps. She always was the wiser one in our relationship. As I navigate this new chapter with Phoebe, I'm trying to balance being supportive with maintaining healthy boundaries. It's not easy, and I'm sure I'll make mistakes along the way, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about our future. Update 2. It's been 3 months since my last update, and the situation has evolved significantly. I wish I could say things have improved, but unfortunately, that's not entirely the case. Phoebe has been sticking with her therapy and making progress. We've had some good conversations, and I can see her taking responsibility for her actions. She's living on her own now and has a new job at a local marketing firm. Slowly but surely, she seems to be getting back on her feet. Last week, she even joined me in the workshop to help with a project. It reminded me of when she was little and would help me build things, usually by handing me the wrong tools, but this time she actually knew what she was doing. It was nice to see that spark of the old Phoebe coming back. The situation with Mark, however, has gotten worse. Despite the police investigation, he hasn't backed off. If anything, he's become more aggressive. Last month, he showed up at Phoebe's new apartment, pounding on the door and yelling. Thankfully, she didn't let him in and called the police immediately. I was at work when it happened, and the thought of Phoebe facing that alone made my blood run cold. After that incident, I insisted Phoebe install a security system in her apartment. I paid for it myself, wanting to ensure she was safe. She was grateful, and it seemed to give her some peace of mind. I also taught her some basic self-defense moves. Anna and I had taken a class together years ago, and I was surprised how much I remembered. As for Jake, he and Phoebe are officially divorced. Now, the process was surprisingly amicable given the circumstances. Jake expressed deep remorse for his violent outburst and is continuing with his therapy. They've both acknowledged that their marriage had been struggling long before the affair, and that getting married so young was perhaps a mistake. It's bittersweet to see the end of what I once thought would be a lifelong relationship for Phoebe, but I'm proud of how maturely they're handling it. But the real twist came last week. I was working in my garage when I heard a commotion next door. I went outside to see Mark being led away in handcuffs. Turns out he'd broken into his ex-wife's house in a drunken rage. She wasn't home, thankfully. But a neighbor had seen him and called the police. As they were putting Mark in the police car, he started shouting at me. He blamed me for ruining his life, saying if I hadn't moved next door, none of this would have happened. It was unsettling, to say the least. His words brought back memories of our friendship, of all the hours we'd spent working side by side. How had things gone so wrong? The police advised me to be cautious, warning that Mark might redirect his anger towards me or Phoebe. They suggested I consider moving, but I'm reluctant to leave the home where I raised Phoebe and shared so many memories with Anna. This house has been my anchor through so many storms. The thought of leaving it behind feels like giving up for now. I've upgraded my own security system, and I'm staying vigilant. Phoebe is understandably shaken by this turn of events. We're in close contact, and I've told her she can call me anytime if she feels unsafe. It feels good to be there for her again, even if the circumstances are far from ideal. It's a stressful situation, but I'm trying to stay strong for Phoebe despite everything that's happened. She's still my daughter, and I want to protect her, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about what Mark might do next. The man I once considered a friend now feels like a ticking time bomb. In moments of doubt, I find myself wandering into Phoebe's old room. It's mostly empty now, but there are still traces of them. Little girl she once was, faded posters on the walls, a stuffed animal peeking out from the closet. It reminds me of simpler times when my biggest worry was helping her with her math homework or chasing away the monsters under her bed. Now the monsters are all too real, and I'm not sure how to fight them, but we're taking it one day at a time. Phoebe and I are rebuilding our relationship, stronger and more honest than before. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I'm relieved to say that things have finally calmed down. The Mark situation has been resolved, though not in a way any of us expected. 2 months ago, Mark violated his restraining order by showing up at Phoebe's workplace. He was drunk and belligerent, making a scene in the lobby. Phoebe's coworkers called the police, and he was arrested on the spot. This time the judge threw the book at him. He's now serving a 2-year sentence for stalking and violating the restraining order. The day of Mark's sentencing, Phoebe and I attended the court hearing together. It was a surreal experience, seeing the man who had once been my friend laid away in handcuffs. As we left the courthouse, Phoebe broke down in tears, not of sadness, but of relief. It felt like a weight had been lifted off both our shoulders. With Mark behind bars, Phoebe has been able to truly start healing. She's excelling at her new job and has even started dating again, though she's taking things very slowly this time. We're having dinner together once a week, and our relationship is stronger than it's been in years. Last month, we even took a weekend trip to Anna's hometown. We visited her grave and shared stories about her. It was painful, but cathartic. As for me, I decided to sell the house after all, not out of fear, but because it felt like the right time for a fresh start. I found a nice little place closer to Phoebe's apartment. The process of moving and going through old memories was bittersweet, but ultimately cathartic. I kept Anna's vase, the one Phoebe had broken. I had it repaired by a local artist who used gold to fill in the cracks, making it more beautiful than before. It sits in a place of honor in my new living room. Jake reached out recently. He's doing well in a new relationship and continuing with his therapy. He and Phoebe have managed to establish a cordial relationship, which I'm proud of them for. They ran into each other at a mutual friend's wedding last month, and Phoebe said it was awkward but not painful progress. I suppose my woodworking has taken on new life in my new home. I've set up a small workshop in the garage and have been teaching Phoebe some basics. It's become our bonding time, a way to rebuild our relationship through shared activity. She's not half bad, must have inherited some of my skills. After all, looking back on this whole ordeal, I can see how every decision, good and bad, led us to where we are now. I still stand by my choice not to let Phoebe stay with me that night. I think it was the wake-up call she needed to make real changes in her life, but I also recognize that I could have been more supportive. In other ways, we're all works in progress, learning and growing from our mistakes. I'm just grateful that my daughter and I have come out the other side of this stronger, wiser, and closer than ever. Anna would be proud of how far we've come as I write this final update. I'm sitting in my new living room, surrounded by a mix of old memories and new beginnings. The repaired vase catches the morning light. its golden seams glinting. It's a fitting metaphor for our family broken, but made stronger and more beautiful by the process of healing Fuvias. Coming over later to help me hang some pictures, we're gonna make homemade pizza just like Anna used to make when Phoebe was little. Life isn't perfect, but it's good, and for now, that's enough comments. User 1NT, you set a clear boundary and stuck to it. Your daughter made her choices and has to live with the consequences. It's great to see how you've both grown and healed over time. User 2 Soft UDA for the initial reaction, but I'm glad to see how things worked out. Sometimes tough love is necessary. Wishing you and Phoebe all the best. User 3NTA. You offered her money for a hotel, which was more than generous given the history. She's an adult and needs to take responsibility for her actions. It's heartening to see how you've both grown from this experience. User 4esh initially, but it's clear everyone has done a lot of growing. This story is a good reminder that healing takes time and effort. User 5NT, you did the right thing by offering alternative help money for a hotel. While maintaining your boundaries, Phoebe's reaction shows she still had a lot of growing up to do. I'm glad to see how your relationship has improved. User 6, this was a roller coaster from start to finish. NTA, and I'm so glad things worked out for you and Phoebe in the end. The repaired vase is a beautiful symbol of your journey. My daughter cheated with my neighbor, then came back bruised. I refused to help her. What happened next changed everything. I'm a 52-year-old man, and my life has been quite a journey. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, the youngest of 4 kids. My parents were hardworking folks. Dad was a factory worker, Mom a school teacher. They instilled in us the value of hard work and family. I met Anna when I was 17. She was the new girl in town, having just moved from the city. I was smitten from the moment I saw her. Anna was everything. I wasn't outgoing, adventurous, and full of big dreams. We started dating, and suddenly my small-town life didn't seem so small anymore. We got married right after high school at 20 and 19, respectively. Looking back, we were just kids playing at being adults. But we were deeply in love and determined to make it work. My parents were hesitant, but Anna's family was supportive. They saw how happy we made each other. A year into our marriage, Anna got pregnant with Phoebe. I was terrified. I was working a construction job, barely making ends meet. As it was, how are we going to support a baby? But Anna, ever the optimist, was thrilled. She said this was our chance to create the family we'd always dreamed of. Becoming a father at 21 was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I worked long hours, often taking on extra shifts, to make sure we had enough. Anna was amazing through it all. She took care of Phoebe during the day and waited tables at night. When I got home, we were exhausted, but happy. Anna was the one who pushed me to go back to school. She saw potential in me that I couldn't see in myself. With her encouragement, I started taking night classes in engineering. It was brutal, working all-day classes at night and trying to be there for my family. In between, there were times I wanted to quit, but Anna wouldn't let me. She believed in me fiercely. I'll never forget the night I graduated. Anna was there in the audience holding 5-year-old Phoebe on her lap, both of them beaming with pride. It felt like all our sacrifices had finally paid off. I landed a job at a local engineering firm soon after, and things started looking up. Life was good for a while. Phoebe was growing into a smart, kind little girl. Anna and I were still madly in love. We'd survived the tough early years and came out stronger. We started talking about having another baby, but then came the night that changed everything. Anna was driving home from her evening shift at the restaurant. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car. She died instantly. I got the call at 2 a.m. and my world shattered. The next few months were a blur. I was lost in grief, barely functioning. If it wasn't for Phoebe, I might have given up entirely. But she needed me, and that kept me going. I threw myself into being both mom and dad to her. We clung to each other, the only family we had left for years. It was just Phoebe and me against the world. I focused all my energy on giving her a good life and being there for her. My job allowed me to work flexible hours, so I never missed a school event or dance recital. Phoebe became my whole world. It wasn't until Phoebe was 13 that I even considered dating again. A coworker set me up with her sister. It was a disaster. I realized I wasn't ready, and maybe I never would be. The memory of Anna was still too strong. Instead, I threw myself into my work and hobbies. One of those hobbies was woodworking. I'd always been good with my hands, and there was something soothing about creating something tangible. I joined a local club, and that's where I met Mark. He was about my age, divorced, with a dry sense of humor that made me laugh for the first time in years. We hit it off, immediately bonding over our shared love of craftsmanship. We'd spend hours in his garage, workshop building furniture and swapping stories. When I mentioned I was looking to move to a better school district for Phoebe, Mark suggested the house next door to his that had just gone on the market. I loved the house immediately. It was a farming craftsman-style home with a big backyard perfect for a teenage girl. Phoebe was hesitant about changing schools, but she fell in love with the house too. It needed some work, but I saw it as a project, Mark, and I could tackle together. We moved in when Phoebe was 14. At first, living next door to Mark was great. Phoebe took to him immediately, calling him Uncle Mark, and often joining us in the workshop. But as time went on, I started noticing some concerning things. Mark drank heavily, and I often heard him yelling at his wife, Lisa. I tried to gently bring it up a few times when we were working together, but Mark always brushed it off or got defensive. I started to distance myself from Mark, especially as I noticed Phoebe looking up to him. The last thing I wanted was for her to normalize the kind of behavior. As I pulled back, our friendship faded naturally. Phoebe was disappointed, but I explained that sometimes adults grow apart just like kids do. When Phoebe was 18, she decided to go to college across the country. I was sad to see her go, but so proud of the amazing young woman she'd become. She'd been dating her high school boyfriend Jake for 2 years at that point. Jake was a good kid, respectful, hardworking, and clearly adored Phoebe. Right before leaving for school, they got engaged. I had mixed feelings about the engagement. They were so young, and I worried they were rushing into marriage, but Phoebe was determined, insisting they could handle the challenges of a long-distance relationship and early marriage. I didn't want to argue, so I gave them my blessing, secretly hoping they'd have a long engagement. For the next 4 years, it was just me in the house. Phoebe would visit on breaks sometimes with Jake. I tried to give them space, not wanting to be the overbearing father-in-law. When they graduated, Jake got a job offer in our town. They decided to move back, and I offered to let them stay with me while they got on their feet. At first, things were great. I loved having Phoebe home, and Jake seemed to be adjusting well to his new job. But as the months went on, I started noticing tension between them. Jake was working long hours at his new job, leaving Phoebe alone a lot. She seemed restless and unhappy. One day, about 6 months after they'd moved in, I came home early from work to find Phoebe and Mark in a compromising position in our living room. I was shocked and furious. Phoebe burst into tears, begging me not to tell Jake. She said she was lonely, and Mark had been there for her. I told her she needed to come clean to Jake immediately, or I would. She refused, saying I had no right to interfere in her marriage. We got into a huge argument. She called me controlling and said I'd never let her live her own life in the heat of the moment. I told her that if she was going to behave this way, she and Jake needed to move out. Phoebe and Jake were gone within a week. I was heartbroken, but felt I'd done the right thing. It couldn't condone her cheating or lying to her husband. Plus, I didn't want that drama under my roof. The house felt emptier than ever without them. For the next 2 years, Phoebe and I barely spoke. She'd send the occasional text on holidays, but that was it. Jake never knew what really happened. As far as I knew, they were still together and living across town. I threw myself into my work, taking on more projects to fill the void. Then last month, Phoebe showed up on my doorstep in tears. She was a mess, bruised face, torn clothes. She said Jake had found out about the affair with Mark and had beaten her up. She begged me to let her stay with me. I was torn. On one hand, this was my daughter, and she was clearly in trouble. I thought about Anna and what she would want me to do, but on the other hand, Phoebe had betrayed my trust before, and I worried about getting pulled into her drama. I told her I'd give her money for a hotel, but I didn't think it was a good idea for her to stay with me. Phoebe flew into a rage. She screamed that I was a terrible father, that if I'd been more supportive, she never would have cheated on Jake. She said it was my fault for moving us next to Mark in the first place. In her anger, she knocked over and broke an antique vase that had belonged to her mother. That was the last straw for me. I told Phoebe to leave immediately and called the police. They arrested her for destruction of property. Now her family is calling me and saying I should have helped my daughter in her time of need. Jake's family is on my side, saying Phoebe made her bed, and now she has to lie in it. I can't help but wonder if I did the right thing. Phoebe is my daughter, and I raised her to be better than this, but I also raised her to take responsibility for her actions. Am I the fool refusing to help her and calling the police? Update 1. It's been about a month since the incident with Phoebe, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their comments and support. It really helped me gain perspective on the situation. After reading your responses, I decided to reach out to Phoebe, not to reconcile, but to get the full story and offer her resources for domestic violence victims. We met at a neutral location at